Okay, some people coming in. Welcome, welcome. All right, so we'll just hop right in. I know we have an hour, so we'll try and make the most of that time. There'll likely be people streaming in as we go. So welcome everyone. My name is Rachel, and I'm the Environmental Education Coordinator at Reforest London, and I'm super, super excited to have you here today to be a part of this virtual education series. This webinar is part of our Solutions at Scale series. All right, so I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement. Here at Reforest London, we're situated at the Westminster Pond Centre, which is situated on the traditional territory of the Ottawadron, Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape people, nations which have had a long-standing relationship with the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. We extend our recognition to our neighboring First Nations communities, the Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation, who continue to steward the land today. We recognize the treaties of this area, such as the London Township Treaty of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum, among others, and understand that we are all treaty people. So we're super excited today to be welcoming Gabor Sass, co-founder of The Patch, Rachel Lissner from Not Far From the Tree, and Julia from Not Far From the Tree as well. And we're going to be discussing food forests and fruit trees and the community around our urban agriculture. So Julia, welcome. She's been the project director of Not Far From the Tree since 2021. Over the past decade, she has collaborated with organizations across Canada to develop and implement public programming in the arts and urban development sectors. Prior to Not Far From the Tree, Julia made significant contributions at Evergreen, both at the National and Brickwork site in Toronto, as well as at U for Change, where she played a pivotal role in building capacity for the organization. Welcome, Julia. I'd like to also introduce Rachel. She's the program coordinator of Not Far From the Tree, Toronto's fruit picking project. She joined the team in 2022 as a longtime volunteer with the organization. Rachel's worked with a variety of organizations that strive to make Toronto a fun and thriving city for everyone, including Cycle Toronto, Jane's Walk, Waterfront Toronto, the Centre for City Ecology, and Progress Toronto. In her free time, she likes to grow vegetables, engage with nature, and explore Toronto through food. Welcome, Rachel. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome Gabor. He is a recognized environmentalist, scientist, consultant, and university instructor, as well as a writer and community activator who has lived in London with his family for over 20 years. Gabor is a part-time assistant professor at Western University, where he teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in environmental science, urban sustainability, and biogeography. He is co-founder of The Patch, a not-for-profit advancing urban agriculture work in London. Gabor's community building includes initiatives like the food forests in Wood Street Park and West Lions Park, and the Pollinator Pathways Project, neighborhood projects that have introduced residents to urban agricultural practices and current environmental concerns. He's a recognized environmentalist in London, receiving the Mayor's Honour Roll for the Environment in 2019, serving as London Public Library's inaugural Environmentalist-in-Residence, and appearing frequently as a speaker and panelist at public events. He and his family work at implementing sustainable practices into their lifestyle wherever they can. So welcome to the three of you. We are so honored to have you here today to speak on this topic. Before I hand it over to you, I just want to let our audience know they should have the opportunity to ask questions throughout the chat. We will be ending with a Q&A. So if you have any specific questions throughout the question period, please put those in the chat or put them in the chat throughout and we can reach them as we go along. So I think without further ado, we'll get started and I'll hand it over to you, Gabor.
All right. Thanks so much for that intro. And I'm very honored to be invited and to be sharing with you some of my thoughts about urban agroforestry. So I prepared some slides here, which will help us on our journey to learn a bit more about urban agroforestry and I guess what my vision would be for London, Ontario, and maybe for other cities as well, which is the food forest city concept. Okay. So this is my backyard or side yard because we live in on a corner lot, and oh, I guess it's not advancing. All the names appear all at once. So this is what you see on a summer's day, with full of various species. Most of these are edible species. Uh, so here are the different kinds from pear to elderberry, gooseberry, northern kiwi, and I've grouped them into, I guess, different layers of a food forest that I'll introduce in a sec in a bit more detail. So different layers to a forest, and same thing with a food forest. Some of them are bigger trees. We do have a black walnut right next to these smaller statured trees. I guess that would be an overstory tree, and then we have smaller trees, shrubs, ground layer, some vines like the northern kiwi and grape, and then lots of plants on the ground surface, and some um, going deeper into with deeper tap roots, going deeper into the soil profile. So, um, sorry, it's my, there we are. Trying to get back into this. The slides are not advancing. Okay, so that's a snapshot of what I have in the backyard. But I want to go back to the original food forests of this land, which were taken care of by different indigenous groups. And there's more and more research coming out, which is kind of unearthing a really exciting picture that shows that a large parts of both North and South America were actively managed by indigenous groups with various means, including fire. There was irrigation where in more arid landscapes. Um, but what we could say, generally speaking, is that they live in a huge food forest. So Eastern North America was a gigantic food forest with the types of trees that I showed you in the earlier slide on the uplands, and the three sisters growing in the lowlands. So that was the agriculture and then agroforestry in the higher position in the landscape. So that's where we start from. Of course, over the years, over the last 300-400 years, we've cut out most of these forests, and we've also had things like the chestnut blight that took out all the chestnuts. Yet this loss still continues. So there was a beautiful apple orchard that was just taken down at the edge of London. And of course, we have many other woodlands, woodlots still being lost. At the same time, we have a food system that's under stress due to various stressors like climate change. And just the food system itself, the globalized, mechanized industrial food system has all sorts of issues from water, soil, health to biodiversity loss, pollinator loss, of course, the contributions of greenhouse gases. We also have a really unequal distribution of the food. Many people are undernourished, some perhaps having too much available and not enough healthy exercise. And then we have geopolitical instability, pandemics that have really put huge pressure on the food system, on the globalized food system. So then many of us are calling, still not friendly with advancing these slides. So there are voices calling for more relocalization of food system, or just rebalancing. No one's saying is that we need to get rid of the globalized food system. Well, we should probably relocalize. And I'm one of those who would say that we need to bring back production closer to home, which will help cut down on greenhouse gas emissions. We cut down on habitat destruction elsewhere. We're making our food systems more resilient, increasing food security, food sovereignty. And I think most of this relocalization, from my perspective, should be using ecological approaches. Okay, and the FOA of the United Nations agrees that in order to improve resiliency, relocalized food system approaches are viable means to achieve that. And this includes going towards more polycultures, agroforestry systems, mixed a more mixed approach to farming. So agroforestry is now being practiced at larger scales, definitely in the tropics and subtropics, and now it's moving into more into these temperate regions of ours. Even Ontario, some farmers are going towards alley cropping, so they would have nut trees on two sides, and in between they would grow corn or wheat, and so applying agroforestry. In an agroforestry situation, we're trying to mimic nature, like a regular forest, which would have different layers, but trying to keep it into more woodland-like or woodland savanna-like setting. The indigenous people used fire to achieve this. We can do that in a especially smaller urban setting just with our planting approaches. Now planting more black walnut trees or big hickory trees, although that they might have their own niche need and place. But yeah, using what we know about forests, and we're trying to mimic those both in form and in process and function, and trying to integrate in these different types of species that go well together, and that not only provide different ecosystem services from cleaner air, adding to soil fertility, improving soil health, and so on, but also on the other side, on the human needs, fulfilling some of those human needs in terms of food, medicine, and so on. Just recently, I was at an art studio tour, and someone was growing willows because they were doing basketry. So that's the type of agroforestry that works even in a small yard. They were growing hundreds of little willow trees. Agroforestry systems are a lot more resilient, as this example shows. Hurricane Ike destroyed a lot of farms. Those that use more agroforestry approaches were less touched. They also rebounded a lot more quickly. And a lot of people are, perhaps they never left this approach, or coming back to this realization that trees are treasure and we need to keep them and we can use them. So the indigenous people, they were actually using the landscape. So they not only had high biodiversity of course, all native trees, but they also were using those systems, right? So we can have like a good human footprint on the landscape, if you will, right? So humans as a force of good, which I believe in. I know currently we might be on another side of the ledger, but I believe that we can coexist with all this biodiversity, including in urban systems. So here's an article that details how urban food forestry has a place and can increase food security and provide ecosystem services. So by the way, if you're interested, I can share all the presentation, and then you can look up all these links. There's lots of examples of different food forests in and around North America and Canada too. If you Google food forests in CBC, even CBC has a whole bunch of articles on food forests. So this was kind of the opening. I don't know how many minutes that was, maybe 5-10 minutes. So the second 5-10 minutes, I'd like to bring it home to show you what I've been working on. And it all started in 2015 when a whole bunch of neighbors came together. Well, I met these neighbors because, as you saw in my first slide, we have a corner lot. And so I was gardening and turning what was just a lawn into a thriving food forest. So as I was doing that, I met all these wonderful people. And we started talking about how we could do something together with involving the whole community. We found this amazing little park called Wood Street Park, really close to where I live. And in 2015, we were fortunate to receive a City of London fund kind of just a seed fund of a few $1,000s, and we planted a food forest. So this is the Wood Street Park Food Forest. It's a small little thing. Let me show you. So it's more like a pocket food forest, but we still love it. And you got to start somewhere. Of course, I wanted to plant the whole park as a food forest, but you got to work with your neighbors, and that's one of the big things that I've learned is that you might have these amazing ideas, but you have to make them socially acceptable, and so you got to start where your community is, right? You might want whole North America as a food forest again, but we're not there yet. So what through these last 8-9 years, what I've really learned is that all this work together with neighbors, planting food forests and pollinator gardens, probably the greatest benefit or outcome has been the increase of community conviviality or cohesion, where we have now become a lot more intertwined community where we do a lot of things together. So this is just pictures of getting that food forest up and running. So we came together numerous times. Then on planting day, I think it was May back in 2015, we had almost 75 people out. Some folks planting their first tree ever, and others later bringing out their guitars, barbecues, and we had kind of an organic celebration. We didn't prepare for such a big thing. We prepared for some parts, but not for this amazing organic celebration that kind of evolved. People were painting this Wood Street Park Food Forest sign. So we had all sorts of activities for various members of the community, including kids. Of course, in these food forest systems, we hope for some kind of production of food, right, and fruits. So we've had that, but this is still a young food forest, and maybe later on we can talk about some of the challenges, and the whole maintenance aspect is the big challenge. So overall, we don't have bushels of every of apples and things coming out of these food forests, but we definitely have some harvest, and a lot of it goes to animals, and then the rest is picked by the neighborhood residents, kids, older people, whoever is looking for some food, they can come and glean, take from the trees, from the shrubs. So here's some of that fruit that we harvested. We worked with Jessica Robertson. Some of you might know her. She's a permaculture designer here in London. And here's the map that she drew up. So we had a whole design for this mini food forest. The following year, we actually had money left over and planted more on the other edge of the park. So it's now a park that has a good number of fruit trees and shrubs. We've even built a gazebo, which has allowed the park to become a place where we can gather for not just food forestry, but also we've had concerts there, Indigenous sunrise ceremonies, all sorts of events. It's also a place where we have created habitat for wildlife, including for pollinators and for other critters. Of course, some of those critters are eating the fruits that we would like to eat, but hey, we got to share. And of course, we're trying to add in as much carbon into the soil and of course into the perennial plants themselves. Yeah, I guess that's one thing I forgot to point out is that in agroforestry, the emphasis on perennial species versus annuals. These food forests, because it's now more than just one, we have turned into an educational hub or hubs as well. So we've had many different types of workshops. Jessica Robertson and others have led different workshops. Many of those were actually supported by Reforest London, by various grants. We've had Growing Chefs, another local organization, come out and lead summer camps in these beautiful community spaces. And we're happy that there's a next generation of young agrarians. So some of these kids are mine. I have two who are now much older. And the picture on your left, upper left, the taller boy there, he's now 17, 18, and he's really interested in agroforestry. He went to Spain to work on a farm, and now he is looking to lead the next phase of this urban agroforestry system here in this part of London. So that's pretty exciting to see. And these ideas are spreading, albeit slowly, but they're spreading. So there's little micro food forests popping up all over the community and in our immediate community, but also in other places in London. And if you Google other cities in Canada, North America, there's a lot of excitement around food forests. So these new initiatives are in various places around London, including not the Waldorf School, but also the some other schools and some other communities have planted maybe just one tree and the guild around that tree, or a bigger food forest. And that picture that just popped up, that's the food hub that I'm part of. That's a new initiative since 2022, where we grow mostly vegetables in raised beds. And everything has to be a raised bed because we're on top of a landfill. But at the same time, I'm trying to also throw in trees, fruit trees in bigger planters. So we have some bigger planters where we planted apple trees and pear trees. We have also pawpaws kind of at the edge of this food hub. Everything in raised beds, so it remains to be seen whether those trees will survive in a really cold winter. They did survive to this spring, so that's exciting. There is support for this type of agroforestry, although it was a long battle to get it acknowledged that urban forests can have this other benefit, which is producing food. It was very hard to get that point across to city staff and some other folks who were involved in this, but now it's in there, so I'm glad to see that. In the urban ag strategy, it was a lot easier shell that urban foodscaping, edible landscaping, including perennial trees, is a viable strategy, and we should have that in there. So it's good to see that. Recently, I was on this with Anna Badillo from Urban Roots. We co-authored this document, Urban Agriculture as Climate Action. And of course, I put in the story of Kensington Village, where I live, where all this urban agroforestry has been going on, along with other types of gardening, some of which are happening on boulevards, some in city parks. So there's community allotment gardens, one community allotment garden, 2 food forests. We have the food hub now, and some other community spaces that we've created. And in totality, I'm calling this an emerging edible neighborhood or agri-hood. So just to sum it up, urban agroforestry, in my opinion, has huge potential, increasing the resiliency of cities. These food forests offer a lot of benefits. In order to scale this up, of course, we need lots of planning and planting today. And so my hope is that during the next 30 years, we can turn the forest city into the food forest city. So thank you very much. planting a tree. The best time to plant the tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And these are pictures from yesterday from our garden. So this is what it looks like in the spring, which is just awesome to see all these beautiful blooms, and of course the bees buzzing around them.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's great to see. We have a lot of service berries blooming here on site as well. So it's yeah, certainly spring is in the air, and it's a great time to see all those plants flourishing. Before we move on to any questions, I am going to pass it over to Julia and Rachel, and we'll get to questions all together at the end. Yeah, but thank you. It's great to see what's happening in your food forest, and we hope to see it continuing to grow. All right, so I'll pass it over. I don't know, Julia or Rachel, who would like to start, or I'll pass it off to you.
Yep, thank you. I'll start, and let me just give me a second, folks, to just share my screen. Okay, I believe everyone can see Not Far From the Tree on the screen. Yeah? Okay. Okay, so hi everyone, my name's Julia Girmenia. I go by she, her. I'm the project director at Not Far From the Tree, and I'll also be introducing Rachel Lissner, who also goes by she, her, and is the program manager of Not Far From the Tree. So the two of us are going to be splitting this presentation, and super excited to answer folks' questions at the end. So we're Not Far From the Tree, Toronto's only fruit picking and sharing project, and we're going to start off by talking about gleaning. Gleaning is simply the act of collecting excess fresh food from farms, gardens, farmers markets, groceries, restaurants, basically anywhere we can in order to provide it to those in need. So there are many examples of gleaning, and we will share them later in our presentation. So our mission and goals in a nutshell are to pick and share fruit to reduce fruit waste and lessen our impact on the environment. As we know, rotting fruit contributes to greenhouse gases, so we're trying to prevent that. Build community by bringing Torontonians together to harvest local fruit from city trees. Increase access to healthy local fruit by sharing the harvest with communities who experience food insecurity. Raise public awareness of Toronto's urban orchard as a viable source of fresh fruit. Build community capacity in fruit tree care, stewardship, and planting. Strengthen food skills in communities experiencing food insecurity by offering fruit preserving and other skill building workshops. Provide an opportunity for city people to enjoy a social outdoor experience that boosts physical and mental well-being. Our origin story, which is a really exciting one. So everyone meet Laura, who's Not Far From the Tree's founder. Not Far From the Tree was founded in 2008. Laura was actually asked to volunteer and lead a fruit picking experience at Spadina House. So Spadina House is a heritage orchard just a few blocks, I was going to say away, but I realized that we're all not in Toronto right now, so away is pretty far apart, but Spadina House is right next to Casa Loma. There's like maybe 12 or 13 heritage trees that are there. So just imagine this beautiful site. Laura was asked to lead a fruit picking workshop for the first time, something she hadn't done before. So as she was leading this experience and then kind of on her way home, Laura started to realize that there's fruit trees all over the city, and essentially started knocking on doors with her friends. And within that first year, I believe they had like over 100 volunteers. And next thing you know, Not Far From the Tree was born. Not Far From the Tree is not the first gleaning organization in Canada. Laura actually got inspiration from the project for Not Far From the Tree from Hamilton Fruit Tree Project, which actually shut its doors a few years ago. So that's a bit about how we started. Literally, it was just like Laura was asked to start picking fruit, something she hadn't done before. And here we are in 2024, continue leading her legacy. So how we operate. So Not Far From the Tree involves a lot of people. in different ways to make the program run. We have thousands of people who have passed through our organization. We have 3 types of members who uniquely make up our community. So we have our tree registrants, we have our pick leaders, and we have our fruit picking members. We use a piece of like a website as like a portal. That's what's used to connect everyone together and to basically plan all of the logistics. We partner with social service agencies to receive our food and also work with the orchards in the city to host large groups. So our pick leaders are the ones that take out a team of 5 fruit pickers to lead these picks. Pick leaders are a volunteer, and the tree registrant, they pay a small fee to have us organize a pick in their backyard for a couple of hours. So the model. So we use the 1/3 model. So basically we go on a pick, homeowner gets 1/3, another third is split between the 6 volunteers. So that's 1 pick leader and 5 fruit pickers. And then the final third is donated to a social service agency, which is like a food bank or any type of community food or meal program. For those folks who are familiar with Toronto community fridges, we also drop off any extra fruit in fridge. Usually by the time a tree registrant or the homeowner calls us, they're pretty much done with their fruit. So usually we just leave them a small basket, and the rest of their portion ends up being donated to a food bank or such. Our equipment. So as a hyper-local organization, we use our iconic fleet of cargo bikes to get our equipment and fruit around the city. We have storage spaces, around 11 storage sites stashed around the city, spanning from Scarborough to Etobicoke, where we keep our bikes safely secured with our equipment. So the pick leader will identify which storage site they want to access the equipment at, which agency in advance they'd like to donate the fruit to. And then they also schedule the pick based on the information that the tree registrant had provided when registering. And they get in the bike, or at times not everyone is comfortable using the bike, or we do have volunteers coming from different parts of the greater Toronto area, not necessarily just downtown where we pick. So some people do end up commuting by car, and then they'll go pick up the equipment, take what they need to deliver the pick. Most people recognize our picking poles as a main tool, but we also use snippers, tarps, mulberry hooks, and usually just our hands to get to the fruit. We use scales to weigh everything, we bag them, and then we split them up. So here's a map of where we operate. We originated in St. Clair West neighborhood, but have since started to pilot an expansion into Scarborough and Etobicoke. There is a massive demand from all parts of the city and the GTA for our program to come out and operate in these spaces. We are primarily a team of 2. Like I mentioned, our program heavily relies on volunteers, so it's hard for us to expand, but Rachel and I are always talking about what are some quick ways that we can try to engage and encourage other folks closer to their homes to pick fruit off with their neighbors or within their communities. We do also pick in some of the orchards, like I mentioned, the Spadina House, but we also pick from the Canadian Film Centre in North York. And also a heritage site in Scarborough. And these are places where we're able to bring in large amounts of 30 to 40 people to lead larger community harvests. So just a little bit of our stats by the numbers. Last season, we picked and shared over 24,000 pounds of fruit. We donated over 13,000 pounds to over 50 agencies. Since 2008, we've nearly picked 100,000 pounds of fruit of all time. Usually year to year, we primarily engage roughly around 1,000 people in our program. We picked from 315 trees last year and hosted 188 fruit picks. So that's just a bit of an intro, and I'll pass it over to Rachel to just talk more about the kinds of things that we do harvest.
Thanks, Julia. So some of these fruits you might recognize from the first presentation. So on average, we harvest about 12 types of fruit, and a lot of them are things that were introduced to Toronto. Some of them are things that are native. So this is kind of it's a little bit of a calendar through photos. So we pick sweet and sour cherries. We have mulberries. These are white mulberries, but we actually pick a whole bunch of different types of mulberries. We have service berries, which Rachel had mentioned earlier, starting to blossom. These are all blossoming right now. And then we have 3 different seasons. So we say we have cherry berry season. And then moving on, we have our stone fruits. So that's usually apricots, plums. Sometimes we have peaches. And then as we get later into early to mid-August till the end of our season, which is usually the end of September, that's when we start to see a lot of apples, pears, grapes. We also harvest currants. And if we're lucky, we get some quinces like right at the end. And people always ask us if we harvest pawpaws. We would if somebody gave a tree to harvest, but they're a bit elusive. Like we know they're in the city, they're just not a part of our program. Next slide. So here's a more visual, easy to read calendar. So again, these are just like the names of the fruits that we pick. We at one point were picking ginkgo, but we moved away from that. But that's also an edible fruit that's popular in some communities in Toronto. So there are also many things that are edible that we don't pick, and we don't pick them mostly because of efficiency reasons. So these are things that you will see in food forests, but given the way that we operate, we've chosen to just encourage people to get to know them on their own. So it includes things like chokeberries, which are really great in fruit leather, all sorts of nuts like American hazelnuts, sumac, which is pretty iconic. It's this one in the middle, this beautiful red sumac color. Um, we also obviously have lots of maple trees, given that we're in, Ontario. We do not tap maple trees, and we don't harvest vegetables. We're strictly just fruit. And also a lot of things, we can only participate in people's yards. We can't go to public parks and harvest. Currently, that's not allowed. It's something that we're very gently encouraging the city to become a little bit more open to. But for now, we only pick in places that we're invited. So over the years, we have a lot of fruit. So we like to come up with something called Fruitful, which are our collaborations. So not far from the tree has a history of collaborating mostly with breweries. That was something that our founder, Laura, and it seems like she had a lot of friends and a lot of really delicious places. And she paved a path to partner with different breweries. So more recently, we partnered with Brickworks Cider House, which was down at Evergreen Brickworks, since moved. And COVID happened, so that kind of changed, that like put a pause on things. But 2 years ago was a bumper season for apples. It was incredible. We had a lot of apples in 2021. So we partnered with this amazing cidery called Revel. They're out in Guelph. You probably know them, but you probably know their work. Their cider's amazing. And last year, it was another bumper year for fruit. So we were able to divert some fruit over to Henderson Brewery, which is in Toronto, and also to Karma Co-op. We just sold some fruit so people could brew on their own. And it's always really interesting to hear what ideas people have for us. We're always open to exploring more partnerships, like maybe partnering with bakeries or partnering with other like brewing agents. But for now, we try to stay local and we just try to see where we can bring our fruit into every possible corner. So, despite our enthusiasm and Gabor's enthusiasm for fruit trees in cities, we have found that gleaning and foraging they are under-researched topics, both in Toronto and across Canada, and I would also venture to say in the US as well. So even though we have a lot of fruit trees on public land, they're not being engaged as fruit trees. We're not treating our city as a city that's a food forest city. And we actually had a student 2 years ago, a forestry student who did a research on the state of fruit trees. We had two students, and one of them did like a big comprehensive report on just the role of fruit trees in urban planning and urban forestry. So that student found that yeah, fruit trees just are a really small part of our overall urban fruit tree or tree population. And our other student found that our fruit trees are having a bit of a tough time Fruit trees are like all trees, like they have a life cycle. They eventually, come to an end. But this student in particular noticed that apricots are having a tough time. We're also aware that just due to different cultural histories within the city of Toronto, that some trees are more popular in different parts of the city than others. So, for example, apricots, I'm pretty sure are more common in the eastern part of the city, in like a downtown spectrum. And we don't really have that many apricot trees in the West End. So the ones in the East End they're there, but they're kind of on a decline. Like, why is that? And also, as a really big city that's grown exponentially over the past several decades, uh, people move in, they bring the fruits that they know and love, they bring them with them to Toronto. And then they move away from those trees, and then new people move in. So people buy houses or are renters, and they have these amazing fruit trees, but they don't know how to care for them. So as a result, a lot of the fruit trees aren't necessarily being cared for or stewarded in a way that makes them accessible or just part of like a comprehensive plan. So a lot of times we are introduced to trees that are just simply too tall for us to pick, which doesn't mean that they're not producing fruit. It just means that our poles can't reach them. And as I mentioned earlier, foraging is not allowed right now. I'm, I would say a little bit optimistic that that might change in the near future. There's a lot of attention in this area, but for now, it's something that's not allowed. And I know the city is exploring what that would look like. But we do have to wonder what would it look like for our future if we had more fruit trees. We know the climate's changing and the world is changing, and we need to be able to plan ahead. So fruit trees are a key player in our future. And just really quickly, we talked about being a gleaning organization in Toronto, and Julia mentioned there are, and actually Gabor as well, mentioned there are gleaning organizations across the continent. So we actually belong to an association of gleaning organizations called the AGO, and they're very much oriented to what's happening in the US. But in Canada, there's like a handful of us, like maybe 12 or so. And gleaning organizations come in all shapes and sizes. We shared with you how we operate, but some are more heavily tied to food banks and like are an extension of a really big food program. Some are more focused on farmers' fields. We found that our organization's kind of unique. Like there aren't that many that operate the way that we do, but it's always interesting to hear what is working in other cities and the cultural connections and practices and who the key players are. And this just is a map of the US specifically. So you can see that gleaning organizations are more commonly found on the coasts. And especially in the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot going on, including BC. BC is also kind of organized, but there's some regional networks going on there. And in Canada, we don't have a map, but if you were to see a map, it would be a bunch in BC and then not a whole lot going on as gleaning organizations until you get to Ontario. There's maybe three of us. There's one in Ottawa as well. There's one in Gatineau in Quebec that I'm aware of. Montreal, if they're like quasi operating. And then there's some gleaning organizations out in the Maritimes, but they're not operating in the way that we do. Oh, yeah, that's it. All right. Yeah, I'll leave it there. All right, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thanks for giving us an insight into what your program looks like and to what sort of things you have going on this year and as well as the past. Um, so I prepared a couple questions. We're at it's 2:45. So if anybody in the chat has any questions brewing, feel free to put those in. But I wanted to start by asking, and it can be open to all three of you. And maybe Rachel, you touched on this as well, saying that when we're not allowed to, you're not allowed to forage in certain places or all over Toronto. But what sort of high level changes in policy or in governance need to be made to take the next step in building your ideal vision for a food forest city or where you expect that to go? Yeah, I'll let you speak on that, Rachel.
Sure. I would say something that Julie and I talk about a lot is the need to train people on how to care for fruit trees. There's an amazing organization in Toronto called Orchard People. It's run by Susan Poisner. She's kind of a rock star in the fruit tree world. And she has all of this training that's online. And we are dreaming up a way that we can collaborate with her, but she is heading towards the end of her career, and there's currently no one in place to really take up her work. So we are trying to figure out how we can advocate for tree care to become a more commonly accessed job opportunity. And we know that if we had a roster of people that we could tap, that our program would also grow exponentially because now there's a whole life cycle that's happening. It's not just people harvesting, but trees that are being cared for in all stages of being a tree. And it would also help us expand to, it would help address like inequities, like in every possible way, social and economic inequities.
Yeah, Gabor, I'll let you speak on that as well. Just before, I was just going to say we had the opportunity to host Susan about 2 weeks ago now. She came for a fruit tree care panel, so we were really happy to host her.
Yeah, and she was here when we organized the Urban Agriculture Conference in 2016. She was one of the presenters. So yeah, I also know of her work, and yeah, people like her are much needed. At a higher level, we need those policies, right? And they are starting to creep in. So I think London is actually kind of leading in this regard. And because we had the last policy round or the last official plan revision was, in my opinion, was done really well because they really went out into the community, wanted to gather all the good ideas. And a lot of those good ideas actually made it into the plan. And of course, what we were pushing for is policies about food system, urban agriculture, edible landscaping, all of this. And some of the language is in there now, right? So at a high level, the policy level, we need that. We need the strategies. So in terms of agroforestry and gleaning, we also need to engage the urban forestry departments because they are from the old school of like urban forests are just for native, like for all the great ecosystem services that they provide for nature, and maybe a little bit for us, but not in terms of food. Food is somehow, no, we don't do food in urban areas. That's old school. Oh, look at all the fruit, it's rotting on the ground. Now all the wasps are coming and yeah, and there's also yeah, natural or ecosystem disservices, right? And that's maybe the category, but I think we can manage that, and with people like you and with Susan who are actually doing the gleaning and then organizing workshops. Reforest London, you're organizing workshops on how we maintain fruit trees. So if we have those people leading kind of the grassroots effort, but then we're being enabled by the policies that, hey, yeah, you can glean from a fruit tree in a public park, right? I mean, I would say, because I like to kind of fly under the radar, I know as an organization, probably you can't say because then you would get into trouble, but to like an individual, of course, glean from, if there's apple on that tree and it's growing in the public park, take the apple. And maybe even bring out your like climb onto the tree, bring out your ladder, and do what you need to do. I know cities are worried about insurance, liability, right? It's a big thing. So
I will. Oh,
yeah,
I
that's
will
it. Like
say,
right. So we need to glean, we need to forage, even and kind of fly under the radar, but then bring it into the official plan that this is a respectable way of leading, and this is how the people who've been living on this land for thousands of years, this is what they've done. They foraged, they had agriculture, Three Sisters, they did food forestry, they did all these things. So why can't we do these? I mean, yeah, we need to teach ourselves. We need to have guidebooks, and we need to have these webinars and all this. Right. Okay, I'll stop. Good.
I
That's
was
okay.
gonna
It's a lot of passion. Yeah, Julia, go ahead.
No, yeah, Gabor brought up a lot of good points. Rachel had mentioned we were engaging with 2 urban forestry students to help us with some fruit tree research. So it was interesting because like we've all said, there isn't much like knowledge or education, and it's extremely interesting that in the urban forestry program at U of T, yeah, fruit trees are not covered at all in terms of like they're not covered. So we were lucky enough to have 2 students from that program that were just really interested on their own around fruit trees. But it's like, yeah, how do we, in addition to policy, but how do we get fruit trees kind of covered under those curriculums so that the folks like growing up who are going to be taking care of these urban forests also know how to take care of fruit trees. Yeah, that was one thing. And I forgot something else that I was just, around picking and with the city. So one thing that is, I always tell people, this is like one of the biggest things I love about Not Far From the Tree and like our community here is that, yeah, foraging is technically illegal, but when you bring our members together, they're just like sharing their favorite trees on certain corners, like on city property, even in my own community, you're seeing more and more people out and about, just like in the trees, picking and eating, which I think is so great. So it's like, yeah, there's like a bit of a shift kind of happening as there's just a need. And then also I think like people coming into this city or they see fruit trees that are similar to fruit trees that they have back home and they're well aware of, yeah, I can pick this random mulberry tree in the park because I know exactly what this tree is. So it's been I think a shift I've noticed during COVID. More and more folks are like getting into the bushes and kind of taking that up on their own. But I just wanted to add those 2 things because I think, yeah, it should also be included in curriculums. And Rachel and I have tried over the past 2 years to try to get some picks kind of happening with the city of Toronto and different parts of the city. And it's literally just through like regular city bureaucracy that we're unable to organize like a neighborhood pick of crab apples, just from the red tape of the city. So that's it. I'll stop. But I just wanted to add those 2 points because, yeah.
No, that's great. I appreciate it. And I think that red tape is, kind of that's the perfect term. There's a lot of benefits, and we know that there's community benefits to doing these things. It's just a matter of making the policies to support that, right? So I saw there was a question in the chat, if I can move to that really quickly. So how can we get schools, especially elementary, to embrace planting fruit trees in the yard? Such an amazing educational opportunity and could also help with students experiencing poverty. Rachel, I saw that you said this is a great question. We haven't had much success getting in touch with the TBSB. I was going to ask, is that something that you've been working towards? I know that that might be another red tape problem as well.
So there are a few things to say about working with schools. I know in Philadelphia, they have something called like an educational garden. So the Philly Orchard Project, they bring schools, they have like their own land, and it's land. I don't know how they came onto it, but they help steward it. So I think that having fruit trees at school is an amazing idea. I'm also sympathetic to the fact that someone has to care for those fruit trees. And something that we're mindful of when people approach us about tree planting projects is it's so beautiful, the idea to plant a tree, but the tree it's not one and done. Like it's a tree. Someone needs to care for it for decades. So if you plant a bunch of fruit trees on school property, if assuming they're not there, in Toronto, a lot of schools already have them because the way Toronto developed, it was like a private estate that then was sold to the city, and the city turned that into public or into school land. So like I know by me, there's a bunch of berry trees just like on the corner of the lots, but people are not often there during the summer when fruit trees are growing. So it's a beautiful idea, but who is that serving? Who's responsible for that? What happens when wasps come because no one's caring for the fruit? Like, it's a big endeavor. And another thing that Julie and I talk about a lot is food insecurity. In the city of Toronto, I think it's currently 1 in 5 people are accessing food banks, which is devastating and not a world I want to live in. But what we have discovered is the scale that we operate on is not going to realistically solve hunger in Toronto. What it is going to do is it's going to engage people to think about things like policy, to think about how can we advocate for the use of public land, how can we get things like urban agriculture into schools, things like that. But we're not Second Harvest, and we can plant a million fruit trees, and hopefully someone's taking care of them. But fruit trees are not the same response to like the food systems that are currently in place that Second Harvest deals with at the scale of like pallets and industrial food systems. But I still think that fruit trees and engaging people is extremely important. But we just have to be, I think, a little bit more realistic in terms of what does it meaningfully address. And I would say that's like heart, body, soul, and getting your hands dirty.
Yeah, really quickly about that, and taking these ideas into schools, and schools are trying them. And the big issue, as you were pointing out, is what happens in the summer. And I think the way it could work is if you have community groups involved, right? Like either the parent groups or community groups that are right there near the school, who can bring in the volunteers, who can bring in the people to maintain the trees or the shrubs. So maybe better would be to start with shrubs, recurrent bushes, raspberries, right? And then have the immediate neighborhood who lives right around the school help with the maintenance in the summertime when the students and the teachers are away.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thank you. I'm realizing that we're getting close to our 3 o'clock dot, so I'll end with one last question, and I appreciate your answers and your time here today talking about these issues that again are, we're working towards these management issues. We're working towards uh, uh, crossing that red tape and really making it possible to have these community projects in the city. The next question I was going to ask is what is the biggest roadblock starting your respective organizations, and what steps did you take to solve it? And if you want to end with a highlight maybe as well, we'll end it on a good note. And I'll pass it over to you, Julia.
I'll say Not Far From the Tree is an interesting case. So I had mentioned that Laura had started this organization as a volunteer project. And I believe for the first couple of years that Not Far From the Tree, well, since our like inception, Laura was working here pretty much volunteer, so she wasn't being compensated at all. So over the years, Not Far From the Tree has gone through just different funding cycles, to be honest. So a roadblock, I think, this is always like everyone hears this, especially if you work in the nonprofit sector. The biggest roadblock really is like our capacity. So we're a team of 2. So at some points, Not Far From the Trees had teams of 5, and sometimes we dip down to teams of 2. So really our capacity is based within the 2 of us. And 100%, oh, that's Rachel, you wrote that. I was like 100% Toronto's so different. But we're actually in the process of trying to redo our strategic plan, because it's time, and see what does Not Far From the Tree look like for the future. How do we stay relevant? How can we better support the urban orchard? How can we, just even build our own capacity so we can do more, so we can get more people picking fruit outside of just where we operate, because everyone should have access to the fruit trees in their neighborhood. But I think realistically, like if you have passion for this kind of work, and if you put all the money and funding aside, and you have a dedicated community around you, like nothing's impossible. That's how Not Far From the Tree is able to pick nearly 300,000 pounds of fruit since our inception, even as a team of 2. But it's just like anywhere, you just kind of got to figure out what is in your way and how do we get around it, and who do we need to partner with. Yeah, I don't know. That's like the best way to just describe it. There's a ton of roadblocks, but I'm going to end on a positive note, is if you have your community with you and we're trying to do good things in the world, then we just all need to, get together to get stuff done. So to make sure we can run a picking program every year and engage people and bring people together. So you just got to have, I think, that passion, as the Instagrammers would say. You got to have that passion to just figure out a way to get stuff done.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you. What about you, Gabor?
Okay, I guess really quickly. So one initial roadblock was a neighbor who worked for the city cutting grass. And he insisted that we keep his view free from the food forest or fruit trees. So that's what we did. We had to cut the size of the food forest footprint into a smaller footprint. Now the end story is that this person moved away few years later, and so he was selling the home, and so he's not a he didn't he was not a hard roadblock where he said no over my dead body that you can do this food forest, but we had to shrink the size. Now as he was leaving, he comes over the almost immediate neighbor and said, Gabor, I think I actually was able to sell my house for a lot more money because you have this nice community space in my backyard or just outside of his backyard. So, well-kept places actually increase property values. I mean, I don't want to end on a money note, but let's more on the side of food forests really bring neighborhoods together, and in brackets, they also help monetarily.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, well, thank you so much for those snapshots of your organization. I know it's a pretty quick hour by the time it rolls around, and I'm sure there's lots more that we could talk about. There's lots more questions that I have, but I can definitely reach out to you to you after, and we can continue the conversation. This is this has been a great like I said, a great snapshot. So I want to thank the three of you for being here today and for being a part of our Solutions at Scale webinar series. I think it's really important to include food in our discussion. So reforest gives away fruit trees, but our main focus is generally on the urban forest, and sometimes our food forests get overlooked in terms of our everyday goals and what we're looking to do. But I think it's so important because there's a lot of management that goes into it. And there's a lot of benefit that comes out of it. So so thank you so much for being here. I'll let you go now. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we hope to keep in touch.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Thanks, Gabor. It was nice meeting you.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise, nice to meet all of you.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Bye. Take care.
Bye.